Governance happens based on a social contract. We cede our power to political parties and the political systems with the belief that the political system is going to represent us fairly and accurately. And so for every instance of unfair representation and inaccurate representation, the social contract becomes ruptured. Trust decreases. And people stop believing in the democratic system, which is why we see South Africa, every election since 1994, has had a decline in people voting, because people don't think that the people they choose to represent them do what they are sent to do.
Welcome to a bonus episode of the African Climate Alliance podcast. Today's episode is brought to you ahead of the South African elections in partnership with Green Connection and Project 90 by 2030. The person you just heard from is Asanda Ngoasheng, who is a globally renowned speaker, diversity expert, political analyst, and academic, reflecting on what democracy and people's power means beyond casting a vote. In today's episode, we are exploring the importance of voting as one way to take a stand for justice and change. With South African elections around the corner, many are wondering who to vote for. So in this episode, we are asking the question, how are South African politicians planning to take climate action? It is essential that we cast our votes with knowledge of who it is we are voting for and what it is they stand for. To help you work through the pre-election confusion, this bonus episode unpacks the manifestos of a few prominent political parties in South Africa, with a focus on climate change, energy justice, and plans for a just South Africa. We will be drawing on a recent recording of the political manifesto debate facilitated by Asanda Ngoasheng, held in Cape Town on the 8th of May 2024, where three prominent political parties, the Democratic Alliance, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and Rise Mzansi, unpacked their political manifestos on points of climate and socio-environmental issues. We also drew on manifesto research conducted by Project 90 by 2030, which summarized the manifesto stances on these same issues. To kick off, let's hear from Dave Bryant from DA, Nazia Paulson from EFF, and Irfan Mangera from Rise Mzansi, who will share more about their manifesto focuses and what they would change if they were elected in the 2024 elections.
Thanks very much. My name is Dave Bryant. I am the DA spokesperson in the National Assembly on Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, and I serve on that committee. And the Minister who sits in opposition is Barbara Creasy. So just to talk a little bit about our position on climate and the environment, we are obviously in opposition in the National Assembly at present, where a significant number of the decisions are taken when it comes to issues around climate change and national policy. But we are also in government in the Western Cape and in a number of municipalities, including the City of Cape Town Metro. So the DA is currently in the process of updating our environmental policy. We do have a natural resources policy which is available online, but it's a bit outdated. So we're in the process of re-evaluating that. And we've been holding a series of webinars with representatives from academia and civil society, and obviously members of our own party as well, to put a key focus on the environment. And one of those key focus areas is obviously climate change. So as a party, we obviously believe that we have to do everything we can to reduce our contributions, greenhouse gas contributions, and CO2 in particular. And then, along with that, putting in place adaptation measures to deal with the coming consequences of climate change. We've seen in the KwaZulu-Natal province a couple of years back the devastating floods and the impact that had, and how much more of a role adaptation could have played in addressing some of the issues that plague KZN. The steps that are required, obviously, to address climate change don't come cheap, and it is going to cost a significant amount of money for us to get the just transition right and to move away from fossil fuels towards renewable resources, and then taking into consideration the human aspect and the number of people who currently rely on the coal industry in particular in areas like Mpumalanga, I think it's around about 100,000 people, direct workers who are employed within the coal industry at present, and ensuring that they are able to find meaningful employment and live fulfilled lives throughout this just transition process when those coal-fired power stations do end up reaching the end of their life. We also believe that in order for us to have a better energy future, we have to bring in the private sector more. We've stated for a long time that Eskom should be unbundled into 3 separate parts, and we don't believe that the state should have a monopoly on energy generation and energy provision. There's certainly a very big role for the state to play. Obviously, the grid will remain under the control and the jurisdiction of the state. But I think what's becoming more and more clear, especially when it comes to load shedding, is that we need to find additional alternative sources of energy. And the cheapest form of energy at the moment is solar energy. And we need to make sure that we roll out as much rooftop solar in particular. That is really low-hanging fruit, and we're doing quite a lot of that in DA-led administrations in the city of Cape Town and the Western Cape. But then also creating what we call prosumers, so people who own energy infrastructure like solar panels, to then be able to feed that electricity back into the grid, the excess electricity, and potentially get revenue for that or get that taken off their rates bills, for instance. So it's a way for us to incentivize people to create more energy. We also need to cut the red tape when it comes to Eskom. There's a lot of really encumbering legislation that makes it difficult for independent power producers to enter the market, and we have to remove those bottlenecks as quickly as possible. From an environmental perspective, we have spent quite a lot of time looking into issues of conservation. I know today is not specifically around conservation, but I was asked what our position is on that. And that is, as I say, already included in our natural resources policy. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm going to end up taking up too much time. But when it comes to conservation, we have huge challenges, particularly in the state-owned reserves like the Kruger Park, where we've seen a 75% decrease in our rhino population due to poaching over the past 10 years alone. And we need to find more effective ways to curb not only rhino poaching, but the poaching of pangolin, succulents, abalone, crayfish, and all sorts of other species that are under severe threat and are being commodified, and also adding to the gang networks within many of those communities through organized crime.
My name is Nazir Paulson. I serve on the Portfolio Committee for Forestry, Fisheries and Environment along with Dave. And I'd like to start with as to how we compiled our People's Manifesto. And so we've had consultative meetings with communities around the country, and here in Cape Town as well, along the West Coast, the Overberg. We've had consultative meetings with communities on various issues. I myself have conducted many of those consultative meetings, and we've also, the other inputs come from specialists and experts in various fields, as well as our experience as an opposition party in the National Assembly, the second largest opposition party in the National Assembly, as well as the legislatures around the country, so our experiences there as well. And we'd like to start our position on the environment that Africa as a whole contributes less than 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. An entire continent of 52 countries produces less greenhouse gas emissions, and yet less than 4%. And yet we are made to pay the biggest price. In April 2022, 459 people along the south coast and eThekwini in KZN lost their lives due to flooding. And yet, what has happened, we've seen the slow response to what happened there. So one of the things that communities have said, they want a government that is going to be proactive rather than reactive. We know there are areas around this country that are prone to floods, that are flood plains, and they want a government that is willing to rather be proactive when it comes to the climate crises or climate catastrophes. And what has happened in eThekwini was a climate catastrophe. 459 people lost their lives unnecessarily. If we had a government that was proactive, would have made sure that either we prepare in the eventuality of a flood, or we remove our people from flood-prone areas. So as far as energy generation is concerned, at COP26, Joe Biden announced that South Africa is going to move from the base load of coal and close down the power stations, the coal-powered power stations, and move to renewable energy. Now, what does that say about sovereignty? We had a president of a foreign country announce, even before our own government or own president could announce, that we'll be moving from coal power baseload to renewables. And I think the government accepted $8.5 billion in return for that transition. We feel that as a developing country, we need a reliable energy supply. And yes, we need to move to renewables, but we need to move to renewables at our own pace. We need to industrialize. We've got serious challenges with unemployment in our country. 11 million people, most of them youth, are unemployed. And in order to provide and create unemployment, we need to industrialize. And you look at the pace of deindustrialization in South Africa. When Saldanha Bay Harbour exports 5 million tons of iron ore every month, it is not just exporting iron ore, it is exporting jobs that could have been done locally. We could have beneficiated our iron ore locally. In 1975, a company was established, ISCO, the Iron and Steel Corporation, where our steel, or rather our iron ore, was beneficiated locally to produce steel, which is important in the production of vehicles, fridges, stoves, microwaves, you name it. So if we produce steel locally and countries want our steel, sure, you can have our steel, but come set up those facilities here in South Africa and provide jobs for our people, right? And also we want local entrepreneurs to want to start businesses and create jobs for our fellow South Africans and youth and women. On the issue of here in the Western Cape, for example, you will know there are certain areas. Every year we have up to 1,000 shacks wiped out by fires. And the response of the Western Cape is to go and give shack dwellers new materials to build new shacks that will burn down next year and repeat the process. So this is not a government here in the Western Cape that is being proactive, it's being reactive. So the idea is build houses, formalize these informal settlements, put in roads that makes it accessible, right? Put spaces between different dwellings, build dwellings, and avoid fire catastrophes. If one shack burns, all of them are going to burn because they're built in close proximity to each other. About the environment, so, people were evicted from Redial in Simonstown during the years of evictions and forced removals of our people here in the Western Cape and in Cape Town. And so now, with the advent of democracy and people would like to move back, they said, no, this is now a protected area. It's environmentally sensitive. So it's the same like when our people were shot in Hangberg in 2011, right? They were shot because apparently they were building their shacks above the fire line. But on the other side of the bay, people were building above the fire line. So some people are allowed to build above the fire line and others not. Okay, so we'll see it's one set of rules for one part of society and another set of rules for another. Okay, so when people, environmental sensitivity, it only comes when African and colored people want to build a decent space to live. They must rather go and build on the floodplains where they become victims of flash floods, and build in congested areas where they become victims of wildfires. So these are the things that we have to address immediately when we take government on the 29th of May 2024.
My name is Irfan Mangera. I am part of the National Leadership Collective of Rise Mzansi and one of the founding members as well, young activist who comes from civil society, and joined by some of the other provincial leaders here today. Rise Mzansi has taken a very serious step in how we view this particular issue. And so in the consultations and discussions we've had with the many communities around the country since we launched, we have brought the urgency around the climate justice problem to our internal workings as well as our political program. And you'll see it within our People's Manifesto that we launched last year, or rather it was in January. This People's Manifesto has 5 key priority areas, and the 5th one being the climate crisis. And we name it as such because we don't just think that climate change is eventually going to catch up with us and we can prepare for it. It's already here. The examples that my fellow panelists have given is true. The fires, the flooding that's happening, the lack of, you'll see our fishermen are unable to catch the same amount as they used to. Or our local farmers can't grow the same crop that they used to, is because climate change is already here and it's affecting our communities. And so we took a deliberate approach to put the climate crisis on the agenda. One of the few parties that has done so, because the youthfulness around this party has meant that this existential crisis must be recognized as such. In our manifesto, we speak of 2 key foundational pillars on how we view this crisis. Number 1 is that we leave no one behind. No one should be left behind. And so the discussions as well that happen around mining companies, around the energy companies and so on, often forget the ordinary citizen and communities in which this affects them the most. So the communities that are reliant on fishing, the communities that are reliant on ESCOM, for example, and those stations, how do we center that voice first and foremost in this discussion? And then 2, how do we help mitigate the crisis that exists so that the impact is not as harsh as it has been, where so many lives are being lost, where the damage to economic infrastructure, to social infrastructure is so high. And so the mitigation of natural disasters can and will be part and prioritized in Rise Mzansi's approach. I want to outline a few things. The increased extractivism of our economy globally, not just locally, because we are globally connected, is a problem. How do we then deal with this from a context in which communities benefit? And so, again, in centering them, we say how we design the systems, and specifically the economic one, so around jobs, making sure that the transition allows for those communities to have community cooperatives where the local residents benefit from any kind of economic activity happening there, which is currently something we're not seeing much of. Those companies end up profiteering off of the hard labor of many workers in these communities, and as a result, you don't benefit. On the issue of our Rise Mzansi's approach to particularly the energy crisis, we've looked at multiple examples, and we've taken one of the big ones is that we think solar should be used on every residential home. Part of the money that we got from the Europeans and the Americans must directly go to developing capacity locally to produce the kind of material so that solar power can be available on all our homes. That helps ease the grid capacity problem that also exists. Now, I'm saying this because in our engagements with communities, one of the biggest challenges, specifically in the Western Cape, has been the cost of electricity. 50 Rand for 3 units does not make sense. And so how do we actually deal with this problem? And so for us is ensuring all communities have access to electricity and affordable electricity. The decentralization of the energy system is critical, and therefore we have outlined a couple of key points. And those points speak about different production. Majority sources for us is solar, wind, ocean and thermal, and geothermal with battery capacity. The minority sources, for example, are small reactors that we believe are an important part of this mix, green hydrogen and natural gas. As I'm stating this, it's a transition away from the coal dependency that we currently have in South Africa. Now, there's an area close to where we are based in Gauteng. It's called Citybang. Sasol is a big company there. And while it's employing quite a number of people, the same people are dying as a result of these diseases that are caused by the heavy pollution. And so what we're saying is the transition has to be encompassed of well-being of the communities that we're in. And so making sure that we tax these companies enough so that they benefit the communities from a health perspective, opening up clinics and making sure that they are protected from the harshness of what they're producing. For us as well, the issue of transport is inclusive in here. The fact that many of our train lines still don't work is a problem. We are spending more and more on taxis and vehicles, but not on affordable, clean, and efficient transport systems. And I think herein is an opportunity for us, again, that the climate crisis provides us with, is that we can build on the rail system that currently exists. From an industrial perspective, I've spoken briefly about green hydrogen, but I think it allows us to develop the capacity to create jobs by opening up these factories. Opening up factories that can help us produce this and also sell it off to the other parts of the world that want to buy these resources. And like my panelist on my right, there is huge potential in us developing that here before we sell it off. And an example we also give here is on agriculture. South Africa produces a lot of food that we export to the world. And yet, 1 in 4 people are going to bed hungry. So how do we actually build a food sovereignty system that actually benefits the people and ensures that the cost of food is affordable and is accessible for anyone in our communities? And so part of what we also propose is that communities need to have subsidized and supported cooperatives in which food sovereignty can be a primary source of generation of economic activity, but also making sure that we mitigate the hunger crisis in this country that very few speak about. In the last 2 weeks, we've produced 2 specific papers, one of which is called the Rising Up Against Hunger paper, and then yesterday, the paper on water and the water crisis in this country. You can go and look at those 2 specific papers because they speak about how we actually propose dealing with these crises that are connected to the climate justice movement.
You've just won the election. Today is day 1. What are you going to do for energy and food sovereignty? Because that's what she said. What are the quick things that you're going to do? What's your plan on day 1, particularly to do with energy and food sovereignty?
Thanks, Jay. Number 1, I'm going to deal with the hunger crisis and say what we propose as Rise Mzansi is stopping food waste. There is enough food in this country so people don't have to go hungry. But where is that food going is the problem. And so we need to hold accountable the corporations that exist and create a system that allows the food that is going into the rubbish bin, that is actually food that is still good and food that is still healthy and nutritious to be used by communities through a system that benefits NPOs, etc. Part of this is also investing in community gardens, ensuring that there's a mixed investment where communities can sell a portion of what they're growing, but also support some of the community kitchens that exist. We'll also speak about increasing the child support grant, because this is another challenge when inflation happens, when food grows. We're not actually growing the type of support base. Particularly, we have a specific policy for single mothers who bear a bigger burden in this country. Additional things are the school nutrition program and expanding it, because many of our kids go to school with that 1 meal a day. What we're speaking of is the school nutrition program being 365 days a year, in which those in those communities can actually benefit from food that can be cooked and is healthy and nutritious. There's a lot more in this plan, but I'm going to try to skip through for the sake of time. The essential food basket items, we agree that we need to regulate it and make sure that they're like the proposals on the table, to make sure that they don't pay any kind of VAT on tax on it. The unsafe foods need to be regulated as well. We're seeing more and more unsafe foods, young people drinking energy drinks when they're as young as 7, 8, 9. Those things need to be regulated. And so you need to put in place a health council, specifically around food, that can manage and process this. We also advocate for a higher tax on sugar, because it's not healthy for children to be having this much of sugar. We've seen with the Nestle case just recently how African countries on this continent are being sold these products, but actually they don't sell it back in their countries, and it's because it has a bearing on the growth and development of children. I want to end off, because of time, on the broken food system that we have and how we fix this by ensuring those within food hunger, food scarce, malnourished areas have subsidized programs to support them. Our leader comes from Mkanduli in the Eastern Cape, where there's lots of land to grow food, but they can't do so because of water and the capacity of the systems around it that's not being dealt with by local government specifically. And so we need to put those under administration, but also make sure that there is sufficient capital support to help these local and sustenance farmers.
The Western Cape government doesn't have any capacity. City of Cape Town doesn't have any capacity. It's outsourced, right? So what the EFF has done in metros where we do co-govern, we've insourced services that fall under our purview. Like in the city of Johannesburg, we've insourced security. There's no longer external companies providing security. Okay, so in that way, we don't pay some company to provide us with labor, right? Because that is a new form of slavery where you pay someone to provide security, you pay them 20,000 rand, that poor security guard gets 5,000 rand, so he doesn't have the quality of life. So when we insourced them, we paid them decent salaries, gave them decent working conditions, with all benefits that goes with being employed by the municipality or the metro. So that is how we have built capacity. In the same way, when we take over this Western Cape government, and we're the only party that's going to take over this Western Cape government, we will have a state construction company. You know, it doesn't matter how many people you pay to come and give you sweetheart questions. It's not going to, the voters out there are going to vote for the only party in the Western Cape that has fought for the poor and marginalized. Okay? Not someone who came from Joburg and has got okay, all right. So we will insource services,
Yes.
and make sure that we deliver the services that our people need directly to them. We will employ the people that will be in our construction company, that will do the security, that will take care of our communities, not outsource it. In terms of water, the Western Cape is very fortunate. We've got an aquifer, we've got an underground lake. So if you look at Philippi, most of all the farms there, they get water from underground. There's an underground lake, an aquifer. It's very long. It stretches 100 kilometers. It could have easily assisted us when we were faced with a day zero issue. Right? So if we had invested in it, as far as the Cape Flats is concerned, and it being not ideal for a place to build houses, I agree. That is why we must expropriate land in areas like Constantia, in areas like Stellenbosch, where we can build decent houses for our people. I've been to Blikkiesdorp. There's a blikkie. And it's not nice to live there. And we need to provide our people with decent houses, with proper facilities, humane settlements, close to hospitals, schools, everything that is needed to live in a decent environment. Am I done?
Thank you.
So in terms of the issue with Blikkiesdorp, look, I can't speak on behalf of the City of Cape Town completely, because I'm not entirely apprised of all of the latest information. But what I do understand about Blikkiesdorp is that it started off as a temporary relocation area, not an ideal temporary relocation area, I think we can all agree. And that grew, and that attracted more informal settlements, and the site grew and grew and grew to a state where it is incredibly unpleasant at the moment, and you do have issues of crime, and that goes without saying and needs to be remedied. I think the challenge that you mentioned, that you spoke to, is the issue with that Symphony Way housing project, which is going to provide about 3,000 opportunities. And that had to be abandoned last year, as you've alluded to, not abandoned completely, but put on hold because there's an extortion racket that's been operating in that area. And one of our city contractors, Wendy Kloppers, who was there, arrived on site and was shot and killed by one of the contractors in cold blood. She had nothing to do with any of the gangsterism that was taking place. So that's been put on hold. And I think what that speaks to is a far bigger challenge when it comes to extortion rackets dealing with the provision of services. It's not just here, but it's particularly bad in certain parts of Cape Town. And that really requires a proper investigation from the SAPs, from the Hawks, to get to the bottom of these extortion rackets and deal with them. In some parts of the country, municipalities and government work hand in glove with some of these extortion rackets. But we don't believe that that's the right way to do it, to be doing business with gangsters in order to prevent them from killing our contractors. There are a couple of roads within the city, I know, where we've been waiting for a very long time to have certain patches repaired because our staff have been shot at. We had another staff member from the roads department who was also shot and killed while trying to repair a road because he hadn't paid a stipend across. I know the mayor put out about R1 million reward for information around the death of Wendy Kloppers, and they have provided additional security. Tertius Simmers about 40 million for additional security on site, but we shouldn't be having to do that.
I want to thank all three members and say that, I appreciate when we have conversations that are fruitful, that are forward-thinking, and that are robust, because it is only through these conversations that we are able to ensure that people know what this democracy they fought for and continue to fight for is and why it's important.
We hope this sparked some food for thought. We wanted to share some brief summaries of the manifesto focuses of a few other prominent political parties in South Africa. Action SA is committed to promoting a balance between environmental sustainability and economic justice. The manifesto has a full section dedicated to a sustainable energy system that ends load shedding. Their plan for a phase-out is for it to be gradual and responsible with a rapid increase in renewables. The African National Congress mentions climate change, the climate crisis, and the need for an energy transition for a cleaner, greener future. However, there are no clear plans in the manifesto for how South Africa will address climate change or how a just energy transition will be managed. The plans that are made to end load shedding through increasing grid capacity and energy generation do not necessarily align with a just energy transition. In an interview with Ground Up, they express a desire to transition in a balanced manner, but the diverse energy mix supports an increase in fossil fuels, such as gas, alongside renewables. Freedom Front Plus is committed to encouraging an energy transition to end load shedding and combat climate change, but does not mention elements of justice that are involved. People and energy climate feel very separate in this manifesto. They reassert these points in their response to a Ground Up interview, advocating scaling up renewables in the long term and a focus on energy security in the short term. Good uses all the right words and has a strong emphasis on justice. Justice is very prominent in their manifesto, but the manifesto is very short and outlines very few clear plans for how things will be achieved when it comes to the climate and energy crisis. The Inkatha Freedom Party manifesto does not prioritize climate change or the just energy transition. While the triple threats of biodiversity loss, climate disruption, and pollution are mentioned, the emphasis is on safeguarding biodiversity and reducing plastic pollution rather than climate change or just energy transition. The United Democratic Movement has some good points on climate change and the environment. However, their section on load shedding is very confusing. It lists nuclear and coal as renewable sources of energy, which is incorrect. Additionally, it states that finite and environmentally unsound resources will be reduced, taking into account the waste they produce, but then it lists solar panels and batteries. This makes it unclear what they consider renewable and what constitutes as waste. The manifesto for Zaki Ahmad is very short, focusing on governance, corruption, and the rights of communities. It does not have a focus on climate change or energy.
In the run-up to elections, we often have this thing where we forget that at the end of the day, regardless of what political party you represent, we are all South Africans trying to build a better future for the entire South Africa, regardless of political affiliation. And I think that it's important for us to constantly remind us of that, because political parties have the power to unite but also have the power to divide. And so as we move towards the last leg, can we please remember that at the end of the day, what we are here to do is to build a better democracy for everybody, to be in a position where we are building a better future for every South African of every hue, of every class, of every gender.
And that concludes this bonus episode from the African Climate Alliance podcast. We will see you at the polls. In the meantime, you can stay connected with us by following us on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. All links will be left in the episode description.